谢谢拉蒂夫先生，以一个独特的视角来展示未来网络的一个发展。拉蒂夫先生呢一直致力于 IPv6的推广。那我们从2003年开始呢，就一直开始进行这方面的合作。下一位呢，我们有请我也是我们的老朋友，来自于 ICANN 国际域名与管理机构的 CTO David Conrad 先生演讲。David 先生呢是从业互联网30年，历经了整个互联网从标准产业化的历程。同时呢，他在亚洲呢有丰富的经验，创建了 APNIC， 同时呢也担任过 ICANN 的这个总经理，现在呢担任这个 ICANN 的 CTO。那么下面呢有请 David Conrad 来演讲的未来网络技术的热点和预测，谢谢。
Thank you very much, and it's very nice to be back in Beijing. It's been a number of years since I was here last, and Beijing, if nothing else, has grown incredibly quickly. I'm going to sort of change tracks a little. So far we've been talking primarily about layer 2, layer 3 related technologies. And I'm going to go up a few layers in the stack, talking about a view of internet infrastructure from the upper layers. I was asked to pick a few hot topics that are currently being discussed in my world at ICANN. ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, is mostly well known for creating new top-level domains. Our real role is to coordinate the top level of the internet system of unique identifiers. And from that vantage point, I've seen a few sort of significant discussions going on. This isn't the normal technology layers that you all are probably used to dealing with, but they do have an impact on the deployment of layers 2 through layers 6 and 7. The hot topics that I sort of identified for this talk are the IPv4 free pool exhaustion, which Latif touched on. The IANA transition. The IANA is the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority. That's the organization within ICANN currently that performs the role of allocating the resources to the various top-level registries, both in the namespace as well as the number space, and we also provide a sort of a secretariat service for the IETF. Talk a bit about security, stability, resiliency, and privacy, a bunch of topics that have been hitting the news quite frequently of late. And because it seems to be a theme here, I'll be touching a bit on the Internet of Things. So first, talking about the IPv4 free pool exhaustion. The graph here on the right shows the trajectories of consumption of address space. So far, APNIC, RIPE in Europe, and LACNIC in Latin America and the Caribbean have all exhausted their normal free pool of address space. They still have a little address space left that they've held over for primarily for transition purposes, to help people transition over to IPv6 or to facilitate new entrants. But the normal allocation procedures for those regional internet registries has been suspended, and in order to get that address space, you have to meet special criteria, like you don't have address space to begin with. ARIN, the American Registry for Internet Numbers, is due to run out in July. I've actually heard that it might occur a little sooner than that. AFRINIC, serving the African continent, actually has quite a bit of address space left there, the bright green line there at the top. However, they have, being the last man standing, it's likely that they will encounter what RIPE is already seeing, which is people trying to game the system in order to get sort of the last dregs of IPv4 address space. That picture on your right is from the Wall Street Journal about 4 days ago. And it was an article describing the reaction by some Microsoft executives when they discovered that there weren't IPv4 addresses available. This actually is a bit surprising because Microsoft is one of the early entrants in the purchase address space from the market race. So this just goes to show that there's still a lack of full understanding about the evolution of the address space and what's been called the completion of IPv4 and the need to migrate to IPv6. Talking a bit about the IANA transition, this is something that has consumed the vast majority of my personal time over the past about 6 months. Back in March of 2014, the US government announced that they were going to be stepping out of the role of acting as steward for the IANA functions contract, which is a contract that sort of details all the activities that ICANN, as the IANA functions operator, performs on behalf of the global stakeholder community, multi-stakeholder community, excuse me. It basically boils down into two components to actually enable this transition. The first is the actual termination of the IANA functions contract, and the second is to improve ICANN's accountability. ICANN is sort of an odd organization, the fact that it's a non-governmental organization that's providing a coordinated service across the entire globe and affecting multiple stakeholders, from governments to academia to researchers to commercial entities. Excuse me. The intent was to transition sometime around September of this year. However, it was clear that that was a target. It wasn't actually a deadline. It wasn't like the transition would be halted if we missed the September 2015 deadline. Each of the operational communities, the naming community, the folks who want to obtain top-level domains or sell names, second-level domains within top-level domains, the numbering community, primarily the regional internet registries, and the IETF are all developing or have developed their own proposals. Those proposals for the transition will be integrated by something called the IANA Coordination Group, and they will synthesize a final proposal that will be submitted to the US government when it's complete for the US government to approve or send back for future enhancements. Looking at security, stability, resiliency, and privacy. This has been a particularly exciting couple of years for anyone who hasn't been paying attention. I envy your ability to avoid the news. There have been impressive data breaches, shell shock, and heartbleed affected tens of millions to hundreds of millions of servers. Apple iCloud had their photo stream invaded, and pictures of many celebrities were made available to the world that probably didn't need to see them. Sony had a major breach. ICANN even got a bit of a breach. We were spearphished, and a couple of our staff actually fell for the spear phishing. Didn't lose any significant data, but it did open our eyes to how even ICANN is now a target for various folks. The evidence pointed to the Syrian Electronic Army as the folks who actually tried to breach ICANN. Why they would be interested in ICANN is an interesting question. Cybercrime, botnets, one of the big ones, Game Over Zeus, was actually taken down. Hespernet is another one. These botnets are collecting tremendous amounts of information, account information for banks and all that sort of thing, and proving to be extremely profitable for the criminals who are actually engaging in their use. And then there was CryptoLocker, the software that would encrypt your hard disk and offer to give you the keys if you deposited a few bitcoins into a public place. Cyber warfare and espionage, the Snowden disclosures continue to provide entertainment for many people. Denial of service. We are now seeing hundreds of gigabit floods of attacks, and we're beginning to see an increase in higher layer attacks. For example, JavaScript insertion that turns everyone's browser into a tool that will allow attackers to direct attacks pretty much anywhere. And then there are the questions associated with privacy, such as pervasive surveillance, something that the IETF has engaged on and has agreed to ensure that all future protocols take privacy into consideration. And then there's always the social networking companies that are commoditizing personal information and selling it in order to drive their services and provide convenience to their customers. Touching on the Internet of Things, as has been discussed in a couple of previous speeches, it seems to me that the wearables, the Fitbits, I actually have a Fitbit Surge, have crossed sort of the tipping point. There's the health monitors, the home monitoring, tracking your pets if your dog has a tendency to walk like mine does. Having a little GPS tracker can be helpful. Smart everything. Apple Watches has, I believe, sold more devices than any single product in this space in the shortest amount of time. Again, smart homes, smart refrigerators, devices that actually keep track of what food you have in your refrigerator and when you put it there. Automotive informatics. Your cars now have upwards of 25 to 50 independent computers all speaking across an internal network. Those networks are now being bridged into the internet. Self-driving cars, as was discussed earlier. And where I live in Silicon Valley, it's actually not that uncommon to see Google-labeled Lexus RX-7 SUVs with little things on the top spinning around and driving, and they have become quite common these days. Virtual and augmented reality. Oculus Rift is finally about to ship their product. Microsoft just announced their HoloLens, which apparently has been pretty well received. All of this means that these networks, devices, will always need to be on. They will always need identifiers to be able to connect with the internet. They have power requirements, bandwidth requirements. The routing to these devices all has to work constantly. And there are definitely security and privacy considerations that are coming up. So I was asked to provide a set of predictions. I should provide the disclaimer that these are purely mine in my fevered brain. They don't reflect, obviously, the opinion of ICANN, any of my previous employers, my wife, my dog, or pretty much anyone else, I suspect. So my first prediction, it's going to cost more before it gets cheaper. In the near term, the exhaustion of the IPv4 free pool is simply unavoidable. As a result, internet costs will rise. It's simply the law of supply and demand. The supply is limited, the demand is always increasing, that translates into more expense. The migration, I believe the migration to IPv6 will accelerate. The replacement of IPv4 devices to facilitate that migration will also cost money. Grab some water. So carrier-grade NAT deployment will definitely increase. It's not only NATing IPv4 to IPv4, but it's also to enable IPv6 only networks to speak with IPv4 entities and IPv4 entities to speak to those IPv6 devices. CGN is known to be quite expensive. I don't expect that will decrease significantly in the near future. Side effect of the exhaustion of the IPv4 free pool will be the fragmentation of the IPv4 address space. It turns out that selling a large number of small blocks will actually gain you more revenue than a single large block. The impact of that will be that we'll have to upgrade the core routers. Right now, the core routing tables are about 512 entries, 512,000 entries. In the future, that's probably going to start accelerating more rapidly, and the older devices that had limitations on the size of the routing tables or had split the routing tables between IPv4 and IPv6 in a way that made it difficult to change will need to be upgraded. In the RIO world, the RIRs will and are experiencing more gaming of their rules, more fraud, more people lying in order to obtain the last remainders of the IPv4 address space. Fortunately, IPv6 is still readily available, and those resources aren't being gamed in any way, but the IPv4 gaming will continue. Over the longer term, I believe that IPv6 will eventually predominate the networking traffic. It turns out that running multiple networks, we know from past history, can be quite expensive. And NAT itself is also expensive, if not in terms of capital expenditure, in terms of operating expenditure and trying to debug problems that are occurring through multiple NATs. The price of IPv4 addresses will continue to go up, and that will provide a signal to the market that it's actually cheaper and more efficient to migrate over to IPv6. So in that way, I actually see the market in IPv4 addresses as a positive thing. The RIRs will, in the longer term, evolve to most likely be a coordinator of the market, providing an industry self-regulatory model that will allow the market to continue to grow and not blow off the routing tables to a point where it becomes untenable to actually route the network. I actually see the regional internet registries turning into sort of a title service where ownership of address space can be verified programmatically. It's going to get more complicated before it gets forgotten. This is talking about the internet governance and related to the IANA transition. I believe, contrary to the assertions of some folks, that the IANA transition will occur. I think when the U.S. government made the announcement, they sort of set the path forward. It may not happen as soon as we would like it to. September 2015, in my view, seems to be unlikely. However, I do believe that the final proposal will be submitted before the end of the year. And I figure it will probably take about a year to actually implement the transition. There's some complexities involved in setting up the new structures that are being discussed within the various and sundry discussion groups associated with the transition. Perhaps this might be a hope, but I actually do believe it is likely that once the transition is actually finished and the U.S. government is no longer involved in the stewardship of the IANA functions and overseeing ICANN, that a lot of folks who are currently very interested in this topic will lose interest and find other things to discuss. Some of those topics sort of fall under the categories of internet governance, and there are things like content control, network neutrality, privacy, access. One of the big issues within the context of the internet today is right now there are about 2.5 billion people on the internet. There are 7 billion people on the planet. How do we get the remainder of the people connected up to the internet to see the benefits that the internet provides? So I also believe it's going to get a bit worse before it gets better. This is related to security, stability, resiliency, and privacy. It turns out that the requirements for convenience and features have and will continue to overwhelm the desire for security. And I believe this will be the case until something really bad happens. Stability and denial of service will continue to grow. It's just too easy today to set up a botnet to flood targets. I actually see the future risk being a diversification in the mechanisms by which denial of services occur. Right now, they're sort of limited to flooding attacks, but we are beginning to see more higher layer attacks, the layer 7 attacks, consuming resources in ways that are very difficult to distinguish between a normal customer and an attacker. The increased reliance on the internet for things like the Internet of Things is almost certainly going to increase in the near term the fragility of the network. Right now, the network still is designed typically as singly honed. If one of your network providers goes down, today, and so you're not able to watch, Netflix or surf, search for a specific term. But in the future, when you have your home monitoring systems and you're able to track your pets via the network, I believe it'll actually become more important for the network to be always on. One bright spot here is, as a result of some of the disclosures related to security, it's likely that we're going to see a vastly increased amount of meshing in the global internet itself, the fibers that cross the oceans of the world. Instead of sort of hubbing off the US, we're going to see a greater diversity in paths, interconnections between countries. This in and of itself will actually improve resiliency. So at a macro scale, I believe the resiliency will improve, but on the micro scale, I believe it's actually going to get a little worse. And then privacy. There is a significant push now to increase the use of encryption technologies to improve privacy. That has some advantages and disadvantages. For computer geeks, encryption's fun and allows you to talk with your friends without any risk of being overheard. However, from personal experience, trying to get your wife or your girlfriend or your mother or your grandmother to do encryption turns out to be extremely painful and not something that I would want to repeat. This also may result in a backlash, something that we're seeing some discussion, at least within the US, about prohibiting or providing some sort of limitation on existing encryption technologies. Back in the late 90s, within the US, there was an attempt to have a key escrow system called Clipper that failed, but we're already seeing discussions about returning to that model. In the longer term, I don't believe the current posture that we have with regards to security is sustainable. Something bad will undoubtedly happen. Someone famous will show up in the news in a way that will encourage people to take security much more seriously. I think the only way that it will be able to be, for it to fully be taken seriously is if it is associated with product liability laws. If in the US, if a car blows up, the manufacturer of the car is often held liable. I suspect eventually we're going to have to get that way with software. I find this extremely unfortunate because it will severely degrade the ability for people to develop software. But when software becomes so critical to the operation of things such as insulin pumps and heart pacemakers, there is no way that we can survive without having a stronger security profile. I believe that source filtering to reduce the prevalence of denial of service will eventually be mandated. Right now, ISPs have the option of allowing any source address to exit their network. I think that in the future it's likely that because of the plague of denial of service that has been hitting us, that there will be a concerted effort to mandate the imposition of source address filtering. As I mentioned, I believe that the internet will become more resilient as time goes on, as people see the internet as simply a critical resource that they can't do without. It'll be seen similarly to electricity and water, where you have backup generators and your own stores of fresh drinking water. You'll see similar improvements with regards to the resiliency of the internet. The area that I am probably the most pessimistic about, and I am perhaps known to be a little pessimistic, is in the area of privacy. The advantages of the convenience and the ability to trade your privacy for some features or tools that make your life easier seem to have won the day. I don't believe that that is going to change much in the future. In the context of governments, it's likely that some governments will be constrained and privacy will be imposed from a governmental level, but I think that the battle has been lost in the commercial space. Finally, it's going to be everywhere. The Internet of Things can also be seen as the Internet of Targets. The security, stability, resiliency, privacy aspects that I discussed previously are undoubtedly going to be a near-term issue. But eventually the Internet of Things will evolve to Internet everywhere. Pretty much everything that you are connected to, that you have on you, will probably have some sort of Internet activity. Interestingly, that means that each one of us will have our own unique electromagnetic spectrum by the various radios that we wear on our body as they radiate outwards, the Bluetooth, the Wi-Fi, the cellular, 3G, 4G, LTE, all of those. So that might actually have an interesting impact on your ability to be found if that was ever an issue. In the longer term, I believe the IoT will become simply the new normal. All of that will have an impact on how the networks are developed. One of the areas where I see SDN as most critical is actually in redefining how the layer 2, layer 3 networks are interconnected, because I do not believe that the current architectures, the current technologies will be able to scale to deal with the number of devices that are in the offing with Internet of Things. While the Internet of Things will bring many new and interesting ways of enjoying our lives, it is also worth remembering that it will bring new ways for crime, espionage, and warfare. So in conclusion, excuse me, all of these topics, one way or another, relate to scaling of the Internet. When the Internet was first designed, we didn't really think that 4 billion wouldn't be enough, or that the U.S. government, who is actually funding a good portion of the development of the Internet, wouldn't have some sort of special role. That the thought that people would use the Internet for bad things, might have intellectually thought about it, but didn't really fully understand the implications. And I don't think that anyone ever believed that the Internet would be associated with everything. Initially, the Internet was basically interconnecting host devices, and now they're interconnecting services. Soon they will be interconnecting everything. In the near term, I actually believe that there will be some chaos as people and businesses and governments adjust to the new normal of always-on connectivity and everything being connected. But in the longer term, I believe that the benefits will vastly outweigh the costs. And with that, I thank you for your attention.